Season 2 of Game of Thrones really has the least amount of Jaime Lannister on screen. Now, this is similar to his limited presence in the second book, A Clash of Kings, but it's done a little differently. Now, if you've watched the first video in this series, you should know that this analysis is strictly on the show depiction of Jaime Lannister. For better context, feel free to click off of this video and watch my Season 1 Jaime Lannister analysis. However, if you are familiar with Game of Thrones and you've seen the show, you don't need to watch the first season review to follow this one. Regardless, a link to that video will be listed in the description box below. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to keep up with this series on Jaime Lannister and much more. And now, on to Jaime Lannister Season 2. I personally don't believe a great deal of Jaime's conflicted views are all too much on display in Season 2. Jaime comes across as arrogant and antagonizes everyone he interacts with in this season. And he truly maintains this until that moment in Season 3 where he loses his hand. Now, the first scene with Jaime is a moment with Robb Stark. Robb has come to visit Jaime for reasons that appear strictly to taunt Jaime. However, Jaime garners very little sympathy as he hurls insults and disrespect back at Robb, calling him a boy often. In this scene, Jaime is presented as no more than a villain with no options outside of verbal assaults that are returned by Robb. Ultimately, Robb getting the upper hand and intimidating Jaime with his direwolf, Grey Wind. Robb reveals that everything that is a secret of Jaime and Cersei's incestuous relationship has been shared to all of the lords of Westeros through a letter from Stannis Baratheon. This detail is actually used by Jaime later to antagonize Catelyn, and we'll get into that soon enough in this video. But ultimately, this scene is just a moment for Robb Stark to flex a bit at Jaime's expense. The next time we see Jaime, his cousin in the show, Alton Lannister, is made his cellmate. Now, this scene does a good job at contextualizing Jaime's role in his family, if that hasn't already been established. When his cousin is clearly an admirer of Jaime, when the scene starts, Jaime hardly recognizes Alton and is dismissive at first. But then it becomes apparent to Jaime that this might be an opportunity. Jaime begins almost grooming his cousin to become a pawn in his escape plan. I mean, this moment could be justified as doing whatever is necessary, but ultimately, this proves to be a failed escape anyway. I believe this shows Jaime Lannister in the most villainous and sinister light. Jaime manipulates his cousin by feigning interest in him and tries to show himself as relatable. When he brings his cousin close to share his escape plan, he brutally beats him to death. When the guard, Torrhen Karstark, enters the cell to check on Alton Lannister, Jaime sneaks up behind him and strangles him with his chains. After Karstark is dead, Jaime takes the keys and releases himself. This moment can only be justified as a means to an end, but there's very little to offer in terms of shades of gray between good and evil. Jaime is acting strictly within the villain role in this scene. The next time we see Jaime, he has been recaptured off screen by the Stark army. As they drag him into the camp, he is beaten and hit, but still maintains an almost cruel smirk across his face, which as an audience makes it challenging to sympathize for the miserable situation he finds himself in. And it wasn't long ago we saw this man murder his own family member. He's thrown down, and this is when Ricard Karstark comes in and demands Jaime's head for killing his son. This scene, as well as Ricard Karstark, is the beginning of a very significant pivot in the fate of Robb Stark and the Northern Cause. But that's for a different video that I do not want to discuss here, but I do think it's worth pointing out that I think there's much more to this than Ricard Karstark just wanting revenge, and I believe that nuance is better presented in the books, and if you're interested in me covering this in another video, let me know down in the comments section below. But back to this scene. Catelyn immediately jumps into the scene to prevent Ricard from killing Jaime. There's a tense showdown as Catelyn demands Jaime live as he is their prisoner and most valuable asset, whereas Ricard is out for justice for his son, Torrhen Karstark, who was killed by Jaime. Catelyn essentially reminds Ricard of Westeros' Policies and Procedures manual and illustrates that Lord Karstark is out of line. As this goes on, Jaime sits back in what appears to be amusement by the conflict he's created among Catelyn and the Karstarks. He even chimes in with some sarcastic remarks thanking Catelyn. She ultimately has him dragged off and bound with chains in a cell. Now that takes us into Jaime's last scene at the Stark camp as a prisoner. Catelyn comes to visit Jaime. Jaime is seemingly prepared to die. When he brings up Ricard Karstark's fury towards him, Catelyn informs him that it was Ricard's son who was on guard duty, and that's who he strangled to death. Jaime claims any knight would do the same, to which this moment unfolds.
You are no knight. You have forsaken every vow you ever took.
So many vows. They make you swear and swear. Defend the king, obey the king, obey your father, protect the innocent, defend the weak. And what if your father despises the king? What if the king massacres the innocent? It's too much.
Now, outside of the scene in Season 3 with Brienne in the bath where he shares the true story of what happened when he killed the Mad King, I think this scene best displays the inner conflict within Jaime that he's carried for a long time. Regardless, Catelyn attacks Jaime with the comment that he's a man without honor, which prompts Jaime to provoke her by sharing that he's only been with one woman, Cersei. After the letter from Stannis, he's apparently comfortable speaking upon this secret. Now in the book, this is done differently, but that was covered a bit in my last video for Season 1. But where Jaime seems to really strike a nerve is when he brings up Ned's bastard, Jon Snow. When Jaime accurately assumes Catelyn's hatred for Jon, it appears this is the final straw, as he seemingly has provoked Catelyn to finally act on her anger towards the Lannisters, and perhaps kill Jaime, as she asks for Brienne's sword. Now, before we see Jaime free, we're actually informed of this at the same time as Robb. When Robb makes it back to the camp and confronts his mother Catelyn, she confesses she did it to save the girls. Now, this keeps happening, and if you're interested in my views of Catelyn constantly weakening the Starks, let me know in the comment section, but I believe Robb is correct when he tells Catelyn that Jaime Lannister has played her for a fool, because at this point, in the story at least, Jaime has not come close to shedding the cloak of being a villain, and that will be further on display over the rest of this season and into Season 3. But we move on to see Brienne has Jaime captive as she is taking him to King's Landing. I think it's important to point out that Brienne also has low regard for Jaime, and in their first scene alone with each other, he keeps up with the clever insults about Brienne's appearance and brags a bit about how his fighting capabilities versus hers would probably be superior. Now, I keep calling Jaime's behavior villainous, and I think some of these more repulsive traits are important as we get into later seasons and the layers to his character are pulled back. The Jaime who desires honor and the Jaime as a villain contrast so well that I do believe this is the show's greatest display of a character whose heart is in conflict with itself. The next scene where Jaime and Brienne encounter the hung prostitutes is a great commentary on where you stand. It has a lot to do with how you view things. It's one of the moments from the first two seasons where it's hard to disagree with Jaime's perspective. As Jaime points out, these women were prostitutes and they were murdered strictly due to serving Lannister men. Jaime states sarcastically that it must make Brienne proud to serve the Starks. But as an audience, Jaime points out to us how nobody in this world truly holds the title of morally superior, as there's despicable men on all sides. This point comes with an exclamation mark when the Stark men arrive, who confirm that they killed these women and also state that they only gave 2 of the 3 quick deaths, alluding to the concept that they tortured the 3rd woman. Once the men realize who Jaime is, before they can really do much, Brienne quickly kills them, and in a manner that I believe earns Jaime's respect for her as a capable fighter. When Jaime questions Brienne about killing Stark men, she states that she doesn't serve the Starks, she serves Lady Catelyn. Brienne will continue to be an important figure in Jaime's development, as he sees what it means to Brienne to take her oath so seriously. And now that is all for Jaime in Season 2. Now, a moment ago, I agreed with Robb that Jaime had made a fool out of Catelyn, and while I think that's on greater display in Season 3, I think you can see that Jaime isn't really out to make things right by Catelyn and return Sansa and Arya. I don't believe he has any intentions of doing this. It's the events that transpire over the next season that truly change his perspective, and Brienne helps guide this for him as well as one of the most principled characters in the show and books. That conflict from doing what he felt was right during Robert's Rebellion to not really caring about right and wrong here in the first 2 seasons is, in my opinion, the best display of George R.R. Martin's guiding principle, which is William Faulkner's quote, the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. I'm so excited to get into Jaime's story in Season 3, and the reason it's so good is because of how carefully they portrayed scenes within the first 2 seasons for Jaime Lannister's character. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, please make sure you hit that like button, and to keep up with my Jaime Lannister reviews and all other A Song of Ice and Fire, George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones content, become a subscriber so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you.